Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The archive and website are designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors on this show, but if we were to pretend that there was a sponsor, this one would be sponsored by the Rhodes Institute for Regional Studies, or REERS. Many years ago, in 2013, I had an opportunity to participate in this program that Rhodes has every summer. I think it was originally started by a guy named Milton Moreland, and then is now headed by Charles McKinney. But that summer, they invited me to participate because one of the students had an art component to their research practice. And basically, the long and the short of this Rhodes Institute for Regional Studies is that students apply to work on a project. They're paired with a faculty mentor, and then over the course of the summer, they do research. And at the end, there's a project. In this case, the student that I was working with made a series of portraits from people that he had interviewed. And the project is kicked off with this week-long sort of research boot camp where the faculty and the students all sort of go around to these different places. Now, the year that I did this project, there were many people involved. One of them was Liz Daggett, who was in charge of the CODA, the Center for Outreach and Development of the Arts at Rhodes College, and then Elizabeth Thomas, who was teaching there. Elizabeth, also Venn diagram overlap, is my first cousin. Her mom and my dad were siblings. And then also Charles McKinney, Charles Hughes, John Bass, Milton Moreland, and Lee Johnson, and Natalie. Oh my gosh, we'll do it again another time. Natalie Persons, got it. Oh yeah, thank you, Hamlet. And this group of teachers were the most amazing, badass teachers I have ever met. And I was there under the pretense of being a mentor for someone else. But I was really there soaking up the genius of these professors, these historians and musicians and philosophers and brilliant, brilliant people. And it was a learning experience that totally changed the way I thought about being in the world. And one of the things that they talked about all the time in this Rhodes Institute for Regional Studies was primary oral history documents, or primary documents, firsthand accounts of history. And that was a thing that started to float around in my head, and had been there for a really long time when I started doing this project. And so, big thanks to the sweet people at the Rhodes Institute for Regional Studies. Now, today's interview is with the artist Jeanne Seagle, and it was recorded on March 2nd, 2024. I have known Jeanne Seagle for a long time. In between undergrad and grad, I had a studio at Martial Arts, and Jeanne Seagle had her studio right next to mine. And many of you may know Jeanne Seagle from her illustration work. She, for a long time, was the person who would make the drawings for the News of the Weird column in the Memphis Flyer. And Jeanne also did a million other things, but also made landscape paintings that are really, and drawings that are just totally stunning. And I knew Jeanne from that time. Jeanne was what I called a 9-to-5er. She would come in the morning and work and then around quitting time, she would leave. Some of the people at martial arts would come in just like on the weekend, or they would only come in like after their day jobs. But Jeanne, that was her day job. She came in and she did the work. And it was like yeah, it really was. It was like a sort of a professional thing. And it was the first time I had ever seen that in that way before. And it became a real model for me. And so I was delighted when I was able to sit down and do this interview with Jeanne Seagle. Again, the interview was recorded on March 2nd, 2024. What's your earliest memory of art?
Well, I have a very vivid first memory of art. I just remember being about 4 years old, I think, and I love to color on a piece of paper, and I remember drawing a picture of a little girl, but unlike most pictures, childhood pictures of people, it was a profile, and I just thought that was fabulous. I loved that I drew that picture, and in fact, I still have that picture.
Now, when was
my mother
this?
saved it for me.
How old were you?
Oh, about 4, I guess.
Okay.
Pretty young.
Okay.
Very young,
Now, what kind of family did you grow up in? Was it here in Memphis?
No, I'm an only child.
Okay.
My parents were a little bit older than most parents. They were around 35, I guess. My mother had me when she was about 32, I think.
Okay.
And they were originally from Colorado, but my father had a job that had the family move around a lot. So we, for the first 10 years of my life, we would move about every 2 years. And most of this was in Arkansas and Mississippi. So we were living in Hot Springs, Arkansas when I was 4 years old.
Okay, now what kind of work did he do?
Well, he worked for the Department of Forestry. And I'm not really sure what he did in Hot Springs because that's not in a forest. But after that, we went to a couple of little towns in western Arkansas where he was a forest ranger. And most people think about a forest ranger as entertaining tourists. It's not that kind of forest ranger. There is a huge forest from Hot Springs, Arkansas, all the way to the Oklahoma border with no towns in between. Gigantic, dense forest. And just about the only settlements in this forest are forest ranger stations where, at that time, the rangers looked after the forests and fought forest fires and made sure that the forest was healthy. And so after living in Hot Springs for a little while, we moved over to a little town called Waldron, Arkansas, and lived on the forest ranger station in the middle of the forest. And it was an idyllic childhood. I would just wander around. We lived on a hilltop, and I would just wander around and swim in the creeks and go visit the neighbors who were almost always hillbillies. As the forest ranger, that was a position of prestige in the community, kind of like being a mayor. And I was an only child, and I would entertain myself by drawing and mostly coloring, with crayons. And since I was an only child, my mother saved all these little pictures that I drew.
Now, do you think it was just because you were an only child, or were they particularly supportive and encouraging in terms of thinking about art?
Well, yes, they encouraged. Yes, they were very supportive. I think probably my mother had a little bit of problems having a child, so I was, and they were older I'm assuming that they had been trying to have a child without success until they finally had me. So I was a very nurtured little kid.
Now, was art a thing that was kind of common in the house? Like, were your parents interested in art? Was there art in the house, or were you just kind of this kid who took to it and then they encouraged you?
Well, I think they were interested in art. My mother's mother was a musician, and she had friends that were painters back in Colorado. And we had some of the paintings that my grandmother had collected from her artist friends. I think both my parents were artistic. You know, my mother especially loved to make things with her hands. She didn't particularly interested in drawing, but she did all of the handicrafts, you know, knitting and making rugs and making my clothes. And my father could draw too, and he would play little drawing games with me.
Like what kind of games?
Well, let's see. There's one called Exquisite Corpse. Do you know what that is? Although my father, I didn't know it had that name, but he would play that game with me a lot. And he would also show me how to, little tricks that you can use for drawing people I remember drawing a cat. You'd start with a square and then a circle on the corner and that kind of thing. But so, you know, they liked art, and they liked music a lot too, and they were both talented in music. I think my mother played the piano every day. Her mother had been a concert pianist, so I guess, you know, my parents had lived lives of culture, I guess, back in Colorado, and then we moved to the woods. And
now, what were their parents like? You were saying that your mom's mom was a musician who had a lot of painter artist friends, visual artist friends. What about your dad's family?
Well, my father's family, his father was a train conductor, and he died when I was about 5, though, so I didn't really get to know him. I don't think he was quite as cultured as my mother's side of the family was, and I didn't know any of my grandparents. You know, like both my parents were older when they had me, and both of them were the youngest children in the family, so that meant their parents were really old.
Right.
So
now, when you were talking about the paintings that were in the house that your grandmother had collected and gathered, what do you remember about those paintings?
Oh, well, I inherited them, so that was what I wanted from the house. And they are paintings by a German man who came to America and painted the frontier. And the paintings that I have were painted in like 1880 or somewhere around there. And he painted landscapes of the, actually of the land that was not very far away from where my grandmother's house was. It was on the prairie, and they lived on the edge of town, and you could see the mountains from, where they lived. And these were paintings of mountains. They were really interesting, though, because one is of a sod house, which makes it kind of unusual.
Yeah.
With the mountains in the background, which are the mountains that we would see. And another one was, I think, like a barn or some cows or something like that. But also the standard flowers, that kind of stuff that was popular back at the end of the 1800s.
Now, for me, I remember thinking about the paintings that were in my parents' house or the art that was in my parents' house, and there was always a kind of mystery around them.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like for you, you really sort of knew the source of these pieces, and you knew sort of the person who made, or knew about the person who made them. What are some things, I mean, obviously these paintings were important. You were saying that these were the things that you have. And then what do you think, like, and you live with them now? And so what do you think about those paintings in particular that might have informed your thinking about art as a kid?
Well, those were really the only paintings that I ever saw. Living in these rural areas and far in the wilderness of Arkansas, nobody had paintings, really, maybe of Jesus, or a print.
Right. Now, when you were talking about living in Arkansas, was it, to me, in my brain, I sort of see you and your family living kind of in the woods, but would you interact with other kids and like go and see other kids' houses and then see the kind of things that were in their houses?
Yes, I did. I remember very vividly going to visit one of my classmates that lived at the bottom of the hill on the creek, and her house, it was a hillbilly house that would kind of shake when you climbed the stairs to go in the front door, and chickens were running around and running in and out of the house, and the walls were papered with the funny papers. Right. I mean, these were really backwoods people,
Now, how long was it that you and your family lived there?
Well, we lived there about 2 years.
Okay.
And then we moved to a larger little town where the people there were not hillbillies. This was an authentic little town.
Okay, and where was that?
That was called Mena, Arkansas.
Okay.
Which, in recent years, I think has gained fame as being a place where drugs have been smuggled into from Mexico. But there was none of that. But I remember that the richest man in town was this guy that would ride into town on a donkey, and with his feet almost touching the ground. And
wow. And so what's the time frame there? When was
Well,
this?
that was when I was in the second and third or fourth grade when we lived there.
Now, how was school there? Was it one of those places where, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is that there's a common thread in terms of talking to a lot of artists that I talk to, and they talk a little bit about their parents, obviously, and about the art that was in the house. And then there's usually a kind of early educational component that's encouraging for the arts. Was that the case with you?
I don't remember any art classes, but I do remember that I was the class artist, and I remember that I would draw paper dolls and sell them to the little girls.
Okay. And then what kind of things were you looking at, you think, at the time? Like, for me, all of my art influences when I was at the age that you're talking about now were kind of the funny papers.
Yeah.
And maybe, television shows or something like that that was in the world. What about for you?
Well, I think a big influence on me were the magazines that my mother would get. Okay. McCall's magazine that had a paper doll in it for the little girls, and Good Housekeeping. At that time, illustrators were popular. This was back in the 1950s, I guess, before photography was used a lot in printing. So I saw, this was a huge influence. I would see all these little drawings in these magazines, and so I wanted to grow up and be an illustrator.
Right.
I didn't really have too much exposure to paintings, but I had a lot of exposure to these illustrations.
Now, looking back on it, what do you think were so interesting, or what do you think was so interesting about these particular illustrations?
Well, I think they were, what I remember mostly, they were line illustrations. You know, all those magazines back then would have cartoons and line illustrations, and you know, here I am. I grew up and I have been illustrating for the Flyer and Memphis magazine for many years, and I think that was just a direct result of those childhood influences.
And I would imagine too that those magazines would be particularly of another place. You know, they weren't. It was more kind of glamorous. You know, like you were saying, and then also kind of not necessarily big city, but certainly bigger than Mina.
Yeah.
And then thinking about some of that exotic nature of the images that you were seeing in there, I would imagine also would be a big factor.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that I wanted to grow up and move to the big city, you know.
Now, what was it about the idea of a big city? And then how did you know about a big city when you were a kid?
Well, we would go visit my parents' relatives who lived in a fairly large city. But the first really big city I remember was going to Cleveland, Ohio, where my mother's sister lived. And I saw that city, and I really wanted to go there. And I would put myself to sleep every night fantasizing about the apartment that I would have in a big city.
Now, what was it that your mom's sister did there?
Well, she was married to... She actually lived in a little auxiliary town, kind of like a German town. And she was married to the editor of the newspaper in that little town.
Okay. And would you guys go there often?
Well, once every couple of years. Usually, though, we would go visit my mother's and father's hometown, which was Pueblo, Colorado.
Oh, okay.
Which is a fairly big, fairly large place.
Yeah, sure. Now, when you would go on vacation or when you would go and travel with your family, would you guys go to museums? Was that a part of it?
No, I don't think so. But where we would go when we went to Pueblo, Colorado, was we would go up to Colorado Springs, where there was a Biltmore Hotel, great big fancy hotel, and we would go there. And I remember going to concerts. I don't really remember my parents taking me to art museums, but we would go to concerts.
Okay. And now, what kind of concerts?
Well, the first one that I remember was Liberace.
Okay.
And
that was there in Pueblo?
That was in Colorado Springs.
Whoa, that's interesting. What do you remember about that? Good Lord, Jeanne, that's a huge story. We need to talk about that for a minute.
Oh, I know. Well, my mother and her sisters were big fans of Liberace. And so we went there, and I saw him, and he was just so effeminate. And, you know, he had on this glittering sequined outfit. I mean, he was where Elvis got his ideas, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So you know, that was just...
And that kind of showmanship, for sure. And then also, if I remember right, there was this kind of idea in country music where you had to somehow be visible to the people far away, you know, in the back of the Ryman or whatever. Uh-huh. And so that kind of flashiness was kind of a part of that. And so I would imagine that. Now, was Liberace on the television at the time? Or was this...
Oh, gosh.
Because I remember he had a television show at some point.
He must have been.
Okay.
You know, but I was really young when that happened.
Wow, yeah, that's huge. Now, just to backtrack just a tiny little bit, you were talking about how when you guys were living in the woods, or when you guys were living kind of in the forest, that you would go and kind of entertain yourself in the woods. And just out of curiosity, what kind of things would you do when you would do that?
Oh, well, you know, I could walk along the path. There was I guess it was a cattle path. Although I don't, I guess I can't really remember seeing big herds of cattle there, but I would walk down these trails, and there would be. I remember there was a big pile of sawdust at one point because of there were saw. It was near a sawmill. I mean, that was the big industry were trees and then cutting them down and sawmills, and I loved to go there, and there was something like a big board sticking out of the pile of sawdust, and I would jump off that board as if like it were a diving board into the sawdust. And there was just a lovely little creek with a little pond that I could go sit in, and I did all of this unsupervised. My mother would let me leave the house, and I wouldn't come back all day long. And I remember going to visit a little old lady that lived on the next hill, and she was a hillbilly too, that lived in a rickety little old house that would sway when you walked up the steps. And she had a book, one children's book, and she would read me this one children's book when I would go over there.
Can you remember what it was?
Let's see. It was something like Hoe Cake Johnny, something like that.
Okay.
Which was about a little boy whose granny had baked him a hoe cake that rolled away from him, and he chased it and chased it. But I like to look at her walls. Her walls were covered with funny papers too.
Right.
So.
And that was mostly to keep the draft out?
Yeah, it was like wallpaper.
Right.
But these people were too poor to have wallpaper.
Right. Now, were you aware of that at the time?
Yes. Yeah. It. My parents were middle class people who just happened to be set in this environment, and I remember that we had a telephone, but there wasn't anybody to call because nobody else in the community had a telephone. So, it was really unusual. We were like the upper class of, we had a television and a telephone, and nobody else did. We moved to Jackson, Mississippi.
Okay.
And I stayed there until I graduated from high school.
Okay. Now, what was growing up in Jackson like? I mean, was there art there? Was there culture there for your parents?
Yes. Yes, I really liked moving there because we lived in a neighborhood where there were lots of kids, and I could play with the kids. In Arkansas, we were isolated, and that was also one reason I think that I was so interested in art, because I didn't have little kids to play with, so I would make art. And was very encouraged by my parents too. They always loved looking at what I had done and praised me, and then I got more praise at school because I was the artist in school too. And then we moved to Jackson, and at first I liked it because I had lots of little kids to play with. But then the schools that I started going to got larger and larger. It would merge with the other kids in town, and by the time I got to high school, I was going to a school that had, I think there were 1,500 in my class. So,
wow.
So that's quite a change from being in a little, teeny tiny little country school.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that change is really radical over that time.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, too, that, I mean, for some people, that would make them either blossom into a person who is really outgoing, but for others, I would imagine it would also make them be more interior.
Oh, yes. Well, I was shy, and here were all of these kids that were came from wealthy families, and whose parents were doctors and lawyers, and but I was still the class artist, and I was able to be noticed because I was an artist, and so that kind of saved me, where I would have just been totally lost in this great big city. And also, they were very conservative, as you know. Jackson eventually kind of turned into a war zone because the civil rights movement was happening.
Now, you were saying that they were really conservative there. Was that something that you noticed in terms of being different from your home life? Were there things that your parents talked about that were in opposition to what was happening in the world?
Oh, yeah. My parents were politically liberal, and most of the people in Jackson were very conservative Baptists, and they didn't believe in dancing.
Right. Now, what form was it that, or what kinds of conversations did you have with your folks about being politically liberal or being different?
Well, when the civil rights movement was really going strong, and the schools were closing, and citizens council schools were happening, and there were marches. Martin Luther King marched down my neighborhood street, and my mother, we went to look at this march, and my mother got up and joined the march, which was total social suicide. In fact, her friends at church just quit being her friend.
Wow.
And
now, when you were saying that, was your mom kind of aware that what she was doing was kind of a big deal, or was it like, well, this is totally logical, that this march is happening, and of course I'm going to hop in there?
Yeah, I think she was pretty innocent about that. But of course, there were people getting killed at that time. The students from northern schools came down and were shot. And I remember my mother had a friend who had moved to Jackson. She was from Jackson, but she'd gone to New York. And she came back to organize for the civil rights movement. And my mother became her friend and started volunteering. She would go out to a black college and teach women how to sew, and that was another thing that her former friends that found that just totally unacceptable for her to do that. It was really sad. My mother lost almost all her friends, and for me, I was I was in high school by this time, and how I wasn't a brave kind of person. I wanted to be accepted, so I just kind of lived this secret life as the child of a liberal family. And in fact, I got a job working for Head Start, and kept that a secret from my best girlfriends. They had friends that. One friend had a boyfriend that went to New York and was working with black children, and her mother told her that she couldn't see him any longer. So I was afraid that the parents of my friends would forbid them to see me. So I would have this job, going and teaching little black kids in the daytime, and then I would just lie about it. I really lived this double life. So it was very, very strange. And
yeah, I can tell, talking to you in 2024, of course, you're really conflicted about that. I would imagine that even then you were particularly conflicted about it.
Yeah. Oh, yes. But on the other hand, though, it was very exhilarating to be I remember going to some sort of a meeting, an NAACP meeting, and standing and holding hands and singing "We Shall Overcome." And that was, just, very, this was a dangerous place to be as a young white girl, but it was also very exhilarating and thrilling to know that I was part of that.
It sounds like you were keenly aware of the sort of the turning point and the importance of this moment in the country when you were doing this.
Oh, yeah, well, that was the hot spot of the nation for the civil rights movement right at that time. And I was very aware of it, but I wasn't really aware how dangerous it was for me because, I could have been shot. People were doing that kind of stuff. And one of the white guys that I had a carpool with had a cross burned in his yard. And we kind of laughed that off. But now, after seeing all these documentaries, and knowing that was very dangerous, and we didn't realize, or I didn't realize that, how dangerous it was. So it was a very meaningful part of.
Now, when you were there and you were talking about art as a way of kind of being accepted and kind of being recognized or acknowledged, what kind of things, or what do you remember about the environment, about the classroom environment there?
Well, I had a really lovely art class and a wonderful art teacher, a young man. And I loved that class. And
Now, who was that?
I can't remember his name.
That's totally okay.
Yeah, that's a shame because he was just a wonderful young man who encouraged me.
Now, what do you remember about him?
Well, he was this was probably his first job. He was just a really young man. And I remember that I would make art in that class that, I look back on it and it was good. It was really good. And I like to use watercolor and ink. And, I still, those are my media.
Right.
I still like to do drawings. And I still like to do watercolors.
Now, do you remember the kind of things that he would bring in and show you guys? I mean, I remember for us, it would be in the form of books, and the teacher would kind of bring things out and set things out. And then sometimes we would see things, or sometimes, because I was in high school in Memphis, we would go to the Brooks Museum and see stuff like on a field trip or something like that. Is that something that was present for you in your high school experience?
I really can't remember what he did, but I remember just loving being in the class, and I'm loving the friends that I made in there. And one thing we did, though, was we made a field trip to the Art Academy in Memphis, Tennessee.
So you made the journey from Jackson, Mississippi
in a bus,
up to MCA. Wow.
Yes, and at that time, it was just one tower, and inside, the students were beatniks. I remember a guy had some bongo drums, and they, and the guys had little goatees and berets.
Right. And so you guys made this trip, and was it a large group of people that made this trip?
Well, it was a busload.
Okay.
One busload, and we came to Memphis, and we came to Overton Park. Here was in the middle of town was a park and the school. I mean, I just thought it was amazing.
And this was in the 1960s still?
Yes.
Okay. And then what do you remember about, because that's a shift as well, in the
Yes.
same way that going from Mena, Arkansas to Jackson, Mississippi is a real shift. Just making that trip from Jackson, Mississippi to Memphis is a radical shift as well.
Yes.
What were some things that you remember noticing about it?
Well, I remember that, I just loved the Art Academy. That's what it was called, the
Right.
Memphis, what was it? The Memphis Academy of Art, I guess was the name of it. And, it just blew me away. But we all...
Aside from the beatniks, what was the thing that kind of blew you away about it?
Well, just having... the architecture was so unusual. It was kind of like a tower in Europe, just one 3-story tower.
Now, we're talking about the building that it's in now,
yeah.
or that it was in, but it was just one of those towers before they had made. There was a partner that was built to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was just one.
Just one tower.
All right. What else do you remember about it?
Well. That's about all I remember. I mean, we went to the Luau restaurant. Have you ever heard of that? Oh, it was just the greatest place. I had my first alcoholic drink there.
Wait, how old were you at this time?
I was about 16, I guess.
And they were serving you guys, or you guys just kind of snuck it in?
Oh, I think I just had a sip, and it wasn't a huge deal, but I remembered doing that.
Where was this place, this luau?
Oh, well, it was in a building that's right across the street from East High School.
Okay.
And it had a tropical theme, had a little stream running through the middle of it with palm trees. You'd walk through this little jungle scene, and it was just, and then there would be the restaurant part, but it was like little tables were, under the palm tree. Right. It was very cool.
Now, were you kind of alone in your excitement and admiration for the Art Academy? Were other people on the trip with you also super excited?
Oh, well, I think everybody was excited. This was the art class, So just the idea of being in Memphis was very exciting. The attitude in Jackson was that any place north of Mississippi is Yankee land.
Right.
So we were up here in Yankee land experiencing all these big city things. And I think this was it was my first bus trip with other students, I think.
Okay, now, and so you guys went to the Art Academy, and then were there other art components to your trip there?
Well, that's about all I remember. I bet we went to Brooks, though, yeah. But I don't remember that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so was your decision to go to MCA, was that sort of in that moment where you were like,
yes.
Oh, yeah, this is really great?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, what about your family? Were they like, oh, hell yeah, Jeanne, go to MCA? Or were they more like, oh, man, are you serious?
No, they were they were very encouraging to me, but they really wanted me to go to the University of Colorado, okay. Where they had gone. And but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be with my friends. And I must say, too, that I skipped a little part where I went to the Mississippi State College for Women for my first 2 years of college.
Okay. Now, what was that like? So first you had gone to the Art Academy on this field trip, came back to high school, and then
went on and went to this women's college, which okay. was very repressive.
Okay.
It was it was full of Mississippi girls who really didn't have any interest in careers. They wanted to just get married or be a candidate for the Miss Mississippi beauty pageant.
Right. Now, what were you studying there?
Well, art.
Oh.
It was probably the best art school in Mississippi.
Okay. So what kind of things were you doing there?
Well, I had a great time being an artist there.
Now, when you were down there in Columbus, Mississippi, you were taking art classes. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what are some things that you remember about that experience in terms of, because I would imagine also there, it would be another broad expansion of your understanding about art.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you remember about that transition from Jackson to Columbus?
Well, one thing I really liked to do, other than go down to this little black neighborhood, was there are all kinds of beautiful antebellum mansions in Columbus. And our teacher would just send us out to plein air paint. And so I would spend most of my days just outside painting these antebellum mansions. And
That's interesting. Now, was there a lot of technical teaching in terms of, well, this is how you mix it and this is how this happens? Or was it just kind of like, well,
no,
you go do it?
no, it was just go do it. In fact, that's how a lot of my art instruction that I've had in my life has been.
Right.
Very little instruction. Just
Right.
go do it.
And then do you think when you were out there, I mean, to me, it sounds like this is a re, almost like a, almost like a reliving of your youth when you were kind of out by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
exploring and kind of going around
Mm-hmm.
and kind of doing stuff. And so here you are in Columbus, kind of doing something similar. What about the people who were around you in terms of the classroom? I mean, for me, one of the things that was really great about going to college was that I was around other people who were as crazy about art as I was.
Yes.
Was that as well for you?
Yes, yes, absolutely. That was just so wonderful to finally be around other artists, and I still think that is just one of the greatest joys in life is to get to have friends that are artists and know artists.
For sure. And also I remember for me thinking about college, that was really the first time that I had been exposed to art that I didn't get.
Mm-hmm.
Art that was beyond the understanding of something that was beautiful or something that was skillful in its rendering or in its making. What about for you when you were in school? Because I would imagine around that time, that was also a time when a lot of things were happening in terms of art and art history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yes, I was. It was. I remember going to Brooks, and that's really the first real art museum I think that I went to. There was a really tiny art museum in Jackson, but it, wasn't very interesting, really. And but I was majoring in illustration. And at that time, illustration was a lot more respected.
Mm-hmm.
In, the illustrators would become famous, and their names would be known, just like painters are now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, we studied the different illustrators. All the magazines had, like going back to my influence by magazines, all the magazines had beautiful, beautiful illustrations. And right at that time, too, acrylic paint was starting to be popular. So I learned how to use acrylic paint, and I did not learn how to use oil paint.
Okay.
So there were all kinds of different techniques that were taught for acrylic paints, and we would do illustrations that would have been the kind that would have been in a popular magazine. And
Now, do you remember in particular some illustrators that were particularly important for you?
well, one of the most famous was named Bob Peak,
Mm-hmm.
and he would do Sports Illustrated illustrations with really splashy paint. And, one thing about being an illustrator is we had to know anatomy, and I think I probably took anatomy drawing maybe 3 days a week. I mean, we were just immersed in anatomy, and that is one thing that a lot of artists don't really need to know now.
Well, what strikes me as interesting is that's a kind of technical, fundamental training. And then when you're talking about like learning to mix things and to go and do things, they were just like, well, you just go out there and plein air paint, And so it seems like there's a total dissonance between those two. One is like, oh, you gotta know what this muscle is, and you gotta know how it works in order for it to function. Did that seem strange to you at the time, or was that something that you just sort of naturally gravitated towards?
Well, I guess that was just how I was so young and inexperienced. I just accepted that as the way things were. Although I do remember being really disappointed when I took a watercolor class. And the teacher said, I think she just said, well, experiment. And didn't have any instruction at all. And, watercolor, there are so many nuances to painting and watercolor and so many rules about how the paint reacts, much more so than, acrylic or oil. And I remember being really disappointed with that teacher. In fact, I think I dropped the course. And I majored in commercial art, and a lot of that was due to my father's influence. He wanted me to be able to make a living.
Sure.
A painter doesn't make a living, but
Right.
But a commercial artist does.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with someone last night who is in the Egyptology department at U of M, and she was sort of talking about needing some drawing students who would be interested in learning some sort of technical drawing skills. And I remember, I think I was telling her the story that, when I decided to change my major from biology to art, like that was a thing that everybody said, because they were so just terrified of me, being a poor despondent artist on the street. And they were like, what about anatomical drawings? Do you think you could do that? Or what about biological illustrations? Do you think you might be able to do that? And so, but that was something that your folks obviously were also concerned with, or also kind of thinking about.
Yes.
And do you think it was just because they had not been exposed to artists in the world, or do you think it was just like you're the only child and we're worried about you?
Well, I don't think my father wanted me asking him for money.
Right.
Which I kind of had a tendency to do.
Right.
But he was really naive about art. He would go to craft fairs and he would suggest to me that maybe I could paint something on a rock, maybe, or maybe paint something on a crosscut saw, or be a teacher. So
now, even early on, you knew that wasn't something that was for you. How did you know?
Oh, well, I wanted to be a big-time illustrator. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I went to New York after school, after a couple of years working here,
right,
to try to get an agent so that I could, start doing work on a national scale.
Okay.
And I was able to kind of worm my way into seeing an illustration agent, and she was, I think she liked my work, but she suggested that I specialize, like just do drawings of food and specialize in that way to, start working in a New York market. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to just do food. I want to do all kinds of things. So, needless to say, I didn't get an agent in New York, but I was really, really ambitious.
Okay.
And
all right, so let me back up just a little bit. And so you made the shift from being there at the women's college to
Yes.
going to the art academy. It was still the art academy
Yes.
at the time. Now, what year was that?
It was in 1967, and I was there when all of the greats of the art academy were there. Burton Callicut, Ted Fairs, Ted Rust, and when the year I graduated was the year that a lot of these folks resigned.
Okay.
So I was able, and I just got this wonderful exposure to these great, great artists.
Okay, well, let's dwell there just for a tiny little bit. So, you said Ted Fairs was there, and so what do you remember about working with Ted?
Well, I was still I was still being an illustrator, but so I can't really talk about him. I didn't have a class with him, but I did have a class with Burton Callicut.
Okay.
And he would take us to the zoo, and we would paint at the zoo. And watching him paint was just incredible, the way he could capture in line these animals who were moving all the time.
So he would draw with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And my commercial illustration teacher really didn't want to be a commercial illustration teacher. He wanted to be a watercolorist. So he would take us out to plein air painting, to Shelby Farms or Shelby Forest, and we would watch him paint, and then we would do landscape paintings. So that's what we did for commercial illustration.
Now, what was it that Burton was teaching? What class was that?
He was teaching just drawing.
Okay.
And I think just being around him was really wonderful because he was such a kind and gentle person. Mm-hmm. And he was, one wonderful thing about going to the College of Art was there were only 100 students there.
Okay.
And all the teachers knew our names and would interact with us and be our mentors. And
now, were there people who went to high school with you who ended up going to the art academy as well?
Yes, my friend, a man named Pat Forche, was what had been in high school. He had been Mr. Most Talented in Art, and I had been Miss Most Talented in Art. So he went up there, and we were good friends. And he did major in painting and did wonderful paintings, and ended up winning the grand prize when he graduated of, the traveling scholarship too. And most of the kids that got that would go to Europe and study in Europe. And he won that prize and then went to New York and has just totally disappeared. He never, he would say he was never going to come south again.
That's interesting.
And as far as I know, he hasn't.
Now, you were describing Burton as a really kind and gentle teacher. What are some ways that would manifest?
Well, what I remember is that I don't remember so much about what he did in school, but I remember that after we graduated, he would come to all of our art shows, and he was getting pretty elderly by then, and I think he was in his 80s, and he would come to our art shows that we had, and that was really lovely that he did that. Now, there was another teacher I had, our drawing teacher, and I can't remember his name, but what he did was be so encouraging, and that has influenced me whenever I taught. He just would encourage and say, this is really good, keep it up. And that was the most important thing for me, I think, was just getting that encouragement. So but I got that from several other teachers. Bill Womack, do you know who he is? He was just such a fun and happy, jovial, joking around kind of guy. And
Now, this was in the classroom.
yeah.
Okay. Now, do you remember any of the things that you guys did in that class, like in terms of assignments, in terms of being connected to one another?
Yeah, I remember a lot of the assignments. Well, he taught typography. I remember that, and we had to learn how to use an old-fashioned printing press and learn how to set type. Did you ever do that in school?
No, but I remember when MCA closed, that was a big thing that a lot of people were super excited about. If I remember right, I think Aero Creative got the type press.
Yeah, and you know,
letterpress.
You'd have to learn you'd have to memorize where the boxes of different letters were, so you could just kind of almost like typing,
right.
But it would be reaching for a letter.
Right.
And I remember so vividly spending months on making my little type thing, and then walking from my table over to the printing press and tripping and spilling all of these separate letters on the ground. It was just heartbreaking.
Oh my God, that's terrifying. Now,
Yes.
What do you think was the atmosphere there at the Art Academy when you were there? Like, was it? I've talked to some people and they've talked about sort of a competitiveness, or they went in with a particular kind of competitive spirit, and then talking about how the different people would get along. What do you remember about the atmosphere in terms of the students who were there?
Well, I think I was very happy to be there, and I think just about everybody else. I mean, here we are, misfits, and here at last were a bunch of people just like us, and the important thing was how good you were as an artist. That's what was important. And I just remember it was one of the happiest times of my life. I was just so happy. And again, had a lot of friends that we'd hang out with, and we do a lot of drinking too, which, that was kind of strange because you'd get all these art students together, all these nonverbal people, and they'd have to drink quite a bit before they'd start talking to each other, So there was a lot of drinking on the weekends, and also there was some drug taking too during the classes. I know one guy would always be high on acid, and come to the class and would spend hours painting one tiny section of his painting over and over all day long.
Sorry. Now, thinking about that, I mean, because you were there at MCA sort of in the late 1960s, and not only thinking about the culture of America at the time, in terms of drug culture, but also thinking about, I mean, that's prime civil rights struggle time.
Yeah.
Was that something that you, as the students, were also aware of?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I think it was my second year of being there, and that was the year that King had come to Memphis for the sanitation workers strike, and a bunch of my friends and I went downtown to see this this parade, and this march. And we got downtown on Main Street, and the atmosphere had changed from happy, jovial to tense, a really tense atmosphere with police cars driving down Main Street at 50 and 60 miles an hour. And that's when King was shot. So
Now, when you were talking about going down there for the march, was it, one of the things I remember just in terms of like historical images is the presence of the National Guard there. Was that something that was also striking? I mean, for me, the idea of anxiety and tension would be, you know, obviously between this almost like a military force and then this group of, you know, peaceful protesters. Was that something that you were also aware of, or was this something that was happening and you were sort of here in the park?
Well, I think I wasn't aware that it was the National Guard, but having these police cars driving so fast down Main Street headed towards the civil, the hotel, the motel. And
So you're talking about the time when the assassination happened?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the day that it happened, and but the mood changed, and we figured we had better go home, and we did, and the town was shut down.
Okay. Now, how were you aware that the mood had changed? I mean,
Well, just the energy.
Yeah.
It had been positive, and then all of a sudden it was dangerous and crazy. And so, we went back home, and Memphis was shut down then.
Now, what was I mean, of course, now, there's our phones and everything, and that's how we kind of know what's going on in the world. But how were you guys in '68 in Midtown? This is where you guys were.
Yeah.
In Midtown, how were you aware of what was happening downtown and elsewhere in the city? Was it through the radio? Was it through television?
The television.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what was because that's such a pivotal point in American history. Were you guys aware of that at all, or was it more like you guys were kind of in this sort of insulated bubble where you weren't exposed to the stuff that was happening downtown?
Well, we knew what had happened, and it's so different. It was so different then. I mean, it's hard to imagine life before a cell phone.
Right.
But, people would tell us. People had seen stuff on television, and then they told us. And, but I was pretty oblivious to a lot of stuff that was going on. I was interested in being an artist and having fun. And
now, what kind of impact did that have on the school itself? Like, were other students involved in protests, or was it again this thing where you guys were sort of concentrating on being an artist?
I don't remember ever marching or. I think we just all we were just so involved in being artists. That was our focus. And, coming up from Mississippi, the media was censored in Mississippi. For instance, when I was going to the W, we knew nothing about the Vietnam War. I had no idea. I think the television would only run sitcoms. It wouldn't air the news. And so by the time I got to Memphis, that's when I really heard about Vietnam. I didn't know what was going on, really.
Because that was also sort of when the Vietnam War was really raging.
Yeah.
And so was that something where you knew, were there not classmates, but people who were your age back home who were going to war?
Yeah, and I know that all the boys would sit around in the student lounge comparing their draft number, But I don't really know anybody that did go, and not then, not while I was in college. Now, later on in my life, when they started coming back from Vietnam, then I was totally aware. And I remember it was kind of bad to be a girl because there weren't very many guys to date for a while. And then they started coming back, and they were all smoking a lot of pot. And a lot of the guys I met had PTSD and were just really messed up for a long time in my age group.
Yeah, sure. Now, thinking back to your time at MCA, so you were saying that you were there when Womack was there, and Fairs and Calicott and Rust. Did you have classes with Rust?
Well, he was the director.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Yeah. And, I mean, the school was his baby, It really, I don't think none of the directors after him really were able to run the school like he did. But he was a very benign presence. He made all the students feel welcome and at home. He knew all of our names, and he'd wander around and visit with us, and
now,
it was very nice.
Who were some of the other teachers that you worked closely with?
Well, Jason Williamson was the one who was my illustration teacher, who wasn't interested in illustration, who would just take us out plein air painting.
Right. Now, that's funny. Do you think at the time you were aware that this person had no interest at all in being an illustration teacher?
He was a problem person. And, now I would probably accuse him of sexual harassment. He was really mean. He was really mean to the girls. And he was really mean to me, and he would say just very derogatory comments. There was also a lot of that kind of stuff going on in that time.
Just in terms of thinking about you as an artist, or you as a woman who wanted to be an artist?
Yes, me as a woman who wanted to be an artist.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, and so it sounds like, while this person was not particularly interested in being an illustration teacher, were they helpful as a teacher in general?
Yes, amazingly enough, I learned so much from this guy.
Right. It's strange, isn't it? Like how
I just hated him.
Yeah, we can have these figures who are like, well, yes, of course, this person is a horrible, horrible person, but gosh, I sure did get a lot out of him.
Yes.
Well, just out of curiosity, what were some things that you feel like what were some positive aspects of your experience there?
Oh, just at the Art Academy.
With
this
him
guy.
Williamson?
Jason Williamson.
Jason
Yeah,
Williamson.
And he quit the next year, I think, and moved to Sedona, Arizona, and became a big-time watercolor painter.
Okay.
Well, with him, I already knew that I liked to go out and do plein air painting because I had done that at the MSCW. But the way he taught, he would do a demonstration and we would watch him. And I don't think that's really a great way to teach, but I did learn all his techniques, and I used his techniques in watercolor. Finally, I have my own style now, but for a long, long time, I had his style.
But also, you were saying before, like so much of your time as a student was spent with teachers who basically said, "Run, go do this."
Yeah.
But then suddenly, here's this man who's like actually showing you guys how to do things. What are some things that you remember in particular about some of those demonstrations? I'm curious.
Well, I can see it in my mind's eye. He would sit with a fairly large piece of illustration board, and just the way he would mix the paint and apply it to the he had a pretty standard watercolor. A lot of watercolors look alike. I don't know if you've noticed that, but just pretty like a classic watercolor, but with a lot of brightness and freshness. He was really good. And so, I really absorbed that. And I also absorbed going out in nature I mean, I do that now. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I learned, doing a lot of that from him. But later on when I taught watercolor, I had to do a lot of reading on my own so that I could teach students what to do. And there was so much I didn't know.
Now, thinking about that time with him, so you were talking about that was the way you were kind of encouraged to go outside and, do more plein air painting. Would that be something that you would do as a group, or was it something where they were like, go out there, and then you guys kind of all fractured off and sort of went off into your own places?
Yeah, we would just ride out there together.
Okay.
But he was very innovative. I mean, we would have nude models out in nature, and
okay.
We did some really, really nice things.
And it's interesting too. I mean, like, I think a lot of the stories that I've heard from MCA, and thinking about my own school experience, so much of what was happening that was really important was being in the studio with other people, and that kind of energy that was happening there. Was that something that translated to when you would go and plein air paint?
Well, I think the idea of being with other people, with other artists, is really just such a joyful thing, instead of being all alone in your studio like we are so much.
What do you think you noticed, or what do you think you gleaned from some of those experiences, particularly at MCA?
Well, that's kind of hard to answer. I'm not really sure. I have always had a love of being around other artists, and we, for many years, I didn't have any artist friends. I was friends with just regular people, and would get frustrated an awful lot with them and my relationship to them. And in recent years, almost all my friends are artists, and I just love being with artists so much more. The understanding of each other, and just the way we look at the world and the things we want to talk about, are so different than what just normal people.
Yeah, the civilians.
Yeah, the civilians.
Yeah. Now, what do you think in terms of MCA? Were there other things that you feel like you took into the world with you? Like, I mean, you were talking about going to New York, and so I would imagine a lot of the students there were really ambitious and wanted to go to other towns and sort of be away from here. What do you think? Were there other things that were happening there at MCA that were sort of motivating for you as an artist?
I can't think of just what we've talked about. A lot of my friends did go to New York, and some of my friends stayed here and continued being artists, and then some of them stayed here and aren't artists anymore, and I think that's probably still true. Or I remember one friend. A lot of these kids were also musical, and they might have, some of them would change to being musicians. I know one of my classmates turned out to be an excellent businessman and started Strings and Things.
Who was that?
Charlie Lawing.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So he wasn't all that great a visual artist.
That's interesting.
But he had a band,
right?
At the Art Academy. That I think the name of it was the Butterscotch Dump Truck.
That's a great name. Now, what were some other teachers who were there at MCA that were important to you, or you feel like were kind of formative in terms of your experience there?
Well, I had a teacher named Mrs. Belote who taught fashion illustration.
Okay.
And she did give great technical instruction on how to paint textures, to how to paint something that looks like fur, say, or a certain kind of fabric. And of course, and now fashion illustration is photographs. But there was a period there when just the most beautiful illustrations. And that was one of the first things I did when I was out on my own, was do fashion illustration.
Now, were there other people who were there at MCA with you that you were really close with, who were colleagues or classmates of yours?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, one of my roommate was named Gay Morgan, and she was a really innovative student. I know she was more interested in fabric, and
because at the time MCA or the Art Academy had a textiles department.
Oh yeah, it was large. There was a guy named Henry Easterwood and Bill Robison. They had a very large room full of looms, and we all had to. Everybody that went to school there had to do a little time in the weaving room and learn how to weave.
I like how you said they have to do some time in there.
Yeah.
Now, was that something that you enjoyed?
Yes, I did. And we would, I remember Vida Reed taught a silkscreen class, and we either would silkscreen fabric, or we would silkscreen a book. And I did a book. I did a children's book with silkscreen.
Now, this was a class that Vida taught when you were there. What do you remember about Vida as a teacher? Because she's sort of she's a presence in my life as a fellow painter, but I never knew her as a teacher. What are some things are there things that you remember about her as a teacher?
Yeah, she was very quiet. She would never talk.
How can you be a teacher at an art college and never talk? Gee, that doesn't make any sense.
I know.
Were you surprised?
Well, she was Vida Reed,
Now, was there kind of, like now when we say, she's Vida Reed, of course there's this kind of like cult around Vida and her paintings.
There kind of was then, too.
Okay.
And at that time, she was doing these gorgeous flower paintings with a palette knife. Have you ever seen those? The texture of these paintings, the paint was buttery, and these were realistic looking flowers, but with a palette knife, and she was famous for that sort of thing. It was before she started doing skies. But no, she seemed like she was very shy and just would not say one extra word than she had to. So that was very disconcerting.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, for me as a student, like that would be disconcerting because it would mean that, like I wasn't doing very well. Was that kind of how you were thinking about it?
Well, she didn't talk to anybody. It wasn't just me. So I don't know what was going on in her life. Some of these teachers were chatterboxes, but not Vida. And even... or maybe it was personal, because even now, it's really hard to get her to say anything to me.
She's very quiet, I think, in general.
She's very quiet.
Yeah,
but I know some other people that just really laugh it up with Vida.
Right.
So what's that all about?
I know, right? It must be like a kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Now, were there other teachers there who were really important? You were there with a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. There were a couple of drawing teachers that were only there a couple of years, and I have forgotten their names, but they would have the kids over to their house. And there's one teacher, I wish I could remember his name, but he was only there for a little while. Ron Picard was there. You ever heard his name? He would think of fairly bizarre class projects in paint. And he ended up painting some murals downtown and maybe doing some sculptures too. But he left to go to L.A. and did something totally unrelated to art out there. And John McIntyre was there when I was there.
Now, what about McIntyre?
Well, I didn't actually know McIntyre, but people talked about him all the time.
Like in what way?
Well, he was just outrageous, and he was so inventive and fun. And, for instance, one famous project he did was getting cardboard boxes and having the students build a tunnel all the way across the second floor terrace, and then crawl through it, and there would be holes where you could pop up and stick your head out, or there'd be, things inside the boxes that you would have to find your way through. And he would just be so incredibly inventive. And I was really jealous that I didn't have a class with him, but I think he taught freshmen, whatever. And I didn't go there as a freshman. I started as a sophomore. But now I live across the street from John McIntyre, so I get to find out all this stuff on a first-hand and personal basis, because he's still like that, I mean, he's just...
Well, thinking about that, I mean, were there other people who were there I mean, for me, one of the things about MCA, again, I didn't go there, and so most of the people from MCA I kind of know outside of there. Were there other people who were real important in terms of thinking about your experience at MCA?
Well, let's see. I took a pottery class from a guy named Thorne Edwards, who was really, I loved doing pottery. Did you? And then we had to go through this rotation of, we did a little bit of each discipline.
Yeah.
Did you have to do that?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, we everybody took sculpture, everybody took one fabric class, that kind of thing, and then eventually they kind of settled on something and they kind of did something. Now, you were saying that you liked pottery. What was it you liked about that?
Well, it was just you were just in so much control of this substance that seemed like it was alive. With one touch, it would change form. And I really loved doing that.
Now, were you at some point tempted? Like, I know you were pretty serious about illustration. At any point were you like, maybe I'll be a welder?
No, painting. That's what tempted me. I really, once I found out there was such a thing as painting, then I wanted to be a painter. Mm-hmm. But I had already gone to college. I had gone to the women's college for 2 years. And then when I transferred here, I had to repeat sophomore year. So I'd already added a year. And I actually went to the counselor to see if I could change to painting. And they would make me go another year. And my father was totally against that. So I just went ahead and in there too, I left and went to L.A. for a year too. And so,
no, wait, what did you do in L.A.? What was going on there?
Well, I got married to this guy and basically I just wanted to go to L.A. And at that time, you didn't live with somebody. You had to marry him. So I married this guy and went to L.A.
When did you meet this guy? Was he a student there at MCA as well?
No, he was a med student. And he lived on my street.
Okay.
And so I did a little time in L.A. too, and didn't make any art there. And I was really miserable.
Okay.
I think if you're an artist, you have to make art.
Right.
And I didn't make any art. But I had all kinds of really strange and bizarre experiences in L.A.
And so you were in L.A. in the early 1970s?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was L.A. like then? Strange experiences?
Well, downtown was pretty dead. I mean, I think all across the United States, the towns were dying. Memphis, certainly. The downtown Memphis was dead. And L.A. was dead, too. And I lived at, this is getting kind of disjointed, but...
I'm okay with that.
Well, I lived with this guy in the dormitories at the hospital that was right in the middle of L.A. And, I remember I would go out and walk to downtown L.A., which is totally unheard of. Nobody walks in L.A., but I did. And I would go through the Hispanic barrio to get to downtown L.A., and I remember being so disappointed. It was just so many stores were closed and nothing was happening there at all.
I would imagine that's also a huge environmental shift, like going from where you were talking about mostly being in the park, mostly being in Midtown. There's a real connection to nature, and then suddenly being there in Los Angeles where everything is very not nature.
Yeah.
I imagine that was also really impactful.
Oh, yeah. It was totally disorienting. Also, it was very smoggy. That was back before any of the restrictions were. We got to L.A. and you could barely see across the street. It was so incredibly smoggy. And
now, what did you do when you were there in L.A., aside from walk around?
Well, I would take the car and go driving around while my husband was off doing whatever he did in, being a resident at the hospital. I would drive around and, I would just come upon the most amazing things. I came upon a Nazi rally, a Nazi demonstration with, a couple of thousand guys in brown shirts with swastikas, armbands, or I would, it was really a lot of fun there. You go to the beach, which was wonderful. Go down the boardwalk. Go to just Sunset Strip and see all kinds of strange people, in weird costumes, walking down Sunset Strip. Going out to eat was really fun. This was the era of theme restaurants, and there were some really wonderful nightclubs that where you would go and there wouldn't be any drinking. It would just be a marijuana nightclub. There was a wonder. This place was so great.
Now, so you were there for how long? For a year?
Just for a year.
Okay.
And then, the marriage collapsed, and I came back home and lived with my father and got a job in Jackson at a department store, and then finally came back to Memphis, where I got a job at Dobbs Houses as a interior renderer for the interior designer for their restaurants, and I would fly to different airports in the United States and draw their restaurants, and that was really fun to do that.
Now, this was right after MCA, or it was before you finished?
It was.
There?
I left after my junior year.
Okay.
Still had my senior year, so I came back and worked at Dobbs Houses and went to MCA.
Okay.
And graduated in the spring of 72 or 73. I'm not really sure.
That must have been really fractured. I mean, you were there at MCA with all these people, and then you left and went away and then came back. I would imagine it would be a totally different cohort of people.
Yeah, I think it was, and plus having to go to work. I remember I would have to drive on the interstate from my house to Dobbs houses and then down at rush hour, and then I'd have to drive down Poplar Avenue to the college. And I just really felt like I was going to lose my mind doing all that commuting, and then I, you know, that only took a year, and I graduated, and I started working. There was another student, a couple of students that had formed a illustration studio and asked me to join in with them.
Now, what was that called?
Well, it started out being an in-house agency to do album covers for Stax Records.
Oh, okay.
So, but that was just, so I spent a year painting album covers for Stax, which was really fun. And then they went out of business. And when that happened, the guys, you know, we started our own studio, which it was Ellis Chappell and a guy named Jim Williams and I, Chappell, Williams, and Seagle. And we rented an old cotton warehouse on Union Avenue, Union and right along the river. We were like 2 buildings from Riverside Drive. And so that started a different era of my life, of living downtown and having this art studio in the old cotton warehouse. And our clients were mostly Malmo and Archer. That was before they merged. And we had a big warehouse, and there were several other people in there. We had a stained glass guy and a copywriter and a photographer. And it was, at that time, downtown was a ghost town at that time. And, you know, we never knew what would be on our doorstep when we opened the door in the morning. I lived there in the cotton warehouse too.
Oh, wow.
And it was really exciting. It was still when all the cotton guys were down there.
Right.
And we had some elderly gentlemen that had been cotton brokers all their lives that were our neighbors. And,
right.
And there was the alley where all of the porters would play craps at lunchtime and have their soul food restaurants, and we made friends with the guys that worked at the cotton and go explore in the cotton warehouses, and it was just really fun and interesting.
Now, what kind of work were you doing for Archer and Malmo?
Well, this was illustration for annual reports. I did a lot of mostly watercolor illustrations for magazines and commercial ads, and we were really successful doing that, and we also had great big parties there too.
I can imagine in a huge warehouse surrounded by, you know, all this interesting stuff that's happening downtown.
Yeah, we had wonderful parties there, huge parties that would get bigger and bigger every year. And the rest of the building, there were 6 units in this building, and this building got the notice of some of the businessmen downtown. Carol Coletta was one of the people that bought in to one of the units, and Roy Tamboli had one unit. Sybil Shepherd had one unit, and which we got along pretty well for a while, but then, our parties got to be so large that that they decided they didn't want us there anymore, and so we sold out, and I got a whole bunch of money. I would have had a whole lot more money if we hadn't sold out. I mean, that's prime real estate. It's right across the street from the new Brooks. It's right there on Union.
Yeah.
So, but we were all poor, young artists, and so we sold to the corporation that owned the building we were part of, and so I went to Europe and just bummed around Europe. And
with the money that you got?
Uh-huh.
Okay, now what'd you end up doing there? P.S., you doing okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay. We got like 10 more minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I just went to all the art museums that I could. That's what I did.
Now, what do you remember about seeing stuff
Oh,
there?
well, it was just my dream come true. Spent time in Paris. I didn't go to England, so I've never been to the Tate, but, I went to lots of museums in Paris, and then traveled down to the coast and went to small museums in small towns, just some wonderful, wonderful museums in small towns.
Now,
in
this
France.
is just you traveling by yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, at various times I would be traveling with a friend, and Peggy Turley was, do you know Peggy? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we traveled together for a while, and but then she'd come home, and then I'd stay and travel some more, and and then in Germany I went to some wonderful museums in Germany where I love the art in Germany too, because they'd have pictures of Jesus with 200 pinpricks with blood gushing out of all those pinpricks, and that appealed to me a lot more than the romanticized paintings in Italy or well, of course, in Paris. My favorite was the Pompidou. Have you gone to those? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've really loved the Pompidou, especially.
Now, what do you remember about that? You were saying, I like that one especially. What was it about that one that you liked so much?
Well, I like seeing contemporary art, or at least art of the 20th century more. I got really tired of seeing, well, the Louvre has wonderful paintings too, but, I really like more current art, I think. And
now, how long were you there in Paris?
Oh, well, I was there for a while, for a month or 6 weeks maybe, and I was in Europe for 3 months.
Wow. Okay. Great.
Yeah, and then I traveled down to the Riviera, and then into Italy. Well, and then Rome and Venice and Cinque Terre, and
Now, what do you remember about that time? About some of the things that you saw there? Like for me, going to all those places, there's very little art that really sticks in my head. Like there's a couple, but for the most part, it was really just sort of being in this strange environment and being in such a totally different sense of architecture and time.
Yeah. Well, I remember vividly being so just struck by the sculpture of Bellini in Rome. Are you familiar with him?
Sure.
And yes, especially the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, I think is her name. That especially, and also being in museum, an art museum that had a lot of more Bellini sculpture that was,
Yeah, I think that's the.
There's a woman turning into a tree.
Mm-hmm.
You know that one.
Yeah, the Apollo and Daphne.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
And also there too were the paintings of what's his name? I think it starts with a C.
Caravaggio.
Yes, yes, I love seeing those.
Yeah, that's
too.
like a little. It's almost like a little pilgrimage / scavenger hunt, because they're scattered all over the city, and they all kind of have different visiting times where you can come and see them. But I know what you're talking about.
But by this time, I was getting kind of burned out. I remember going to the Vatican and standing in line to see the ceiling,
right.
And just going, oh, forget it, and just leaving. I was just too tired of standing in line and too tired of seeing magnificent masterpieces. So I just left that and I got in all kinds of strange adventures, and over there, which I won't include now. But let's say I got really lucky that I didn't get stuck in an Italian jail.
I think that usually means that there was some good traveling. That's probably a good place to stop, where Jeanne is not in an Italian prison. All right, that sounds good. And that was the interview with Jeanne Seagle. That interview was recorded on March 2nd, 2024. Please join us next week when we have another interview. Until then, thank you for listening.